Starting off this very unfair list at number 10 was Santiago Ventura. In 1986, he was convicted of murdering a 19-year-old man after they had an argument. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but maintained his innocence despite being offered a plea deal. He made several appeals after his conviction, but they were all denied. However, due to a lack of an appropriate interpreter and other deficiencies in the trial, it actually led to his conviction being overturned, and it was determined that a different person was responsible for the murder. He spent about 5 years in prison as an innocent man, but he had plans to become a lawyer someday so that he can help people in a very similar situation. And like I said, we all know there's many people in this situation.
In our 9th spot, we have Chaylin Funes. 18-year-old Chaylin Funes was ruthless the night she killed a man named Eric Fisher. That night, she hit Fisher with her car, slamming him through a fence. Then she backed up, hit him again, and then dragged his body down the street. This was all witnessed by the man's family. During her sentencing, she broke down reading an apology note to the Fisher family, but the judge did not buy her apology. He even called her out, saying, and I quote, "The tears I'm seeing from the defendant are crocodile tears." Didn't matter how much she cried and choked on her words, she was still sentenced to life in prison. Moving on to number 8, we have Dylan Shoemaker. But before I go any further, you know the drill. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that bell notification button. Just do all that. It really helps us out.
I didn't mean to hurt him.
17-year-old Dylan Shoemaker was arrested and convicted of murder and abuse of his girlfriend's child. He was asked to babysit the child, but when his girlfriend returned home, he had been killed. Apparently, the kid wouldn't stop crying, and so he turned to extreme measures. But in court, Dylan was the one that couldn't stop crying. He burst into tears while delivering his final statement. Now, apparently before he entered the courtroom, he told the guards that they should watch the performance that he was going to put on. So it could just be that him crying his eyes out was all just one big act to get out of his sentence. Didn't work though. Coming in at number 7, we have Jacob Morgan. In 2015, Jacob Morgan set fire to his house that led to the death of his younger brother. Now, Jacob argued that he didn't do it intentionally. The fire was an accident and he tried to save his brother, but before he knew it, the whole home was engulfed in flames. But Jacob loved playing with fire, and weeks prior he actually set his room on fire but was able to quickly put out the flames. In court, Jacob could not keep it together. While bawling his eyes out, Jacob can be seen praying. And then, when he gets his sentence, he freaks out even more.
Well, I am going to find that there is probable cause to charge the individual with the bound over for General Sessions Court for both charges.
Moving on to number 6, we have Antonio Barbeau. Antonio Barbeau was only 13 years old when him and his friend killed his great-grandmother. Apparently, the two wanted money for pizza and weed and thought to do so by killing the grandmother and stealing her money and jewelry. Let me repeat that again. They killed an elderly woman all for pizza and weed. That's ridiculous. Well, both were found guilty, obviously, and sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years. During Antonio's hearing, he breaks down while reading his statement. His lawyer then had to finish it for him.
I took away someone's mother, their grandma, sister, friend, when I had no right to do so.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Fernando Salgado. So in 2012, Fernando attacked one of his classmates with a weapon, and then he tried to insert another up the classmate's rectum. As a result, he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of attempted assault with a foreign object. After receiving his sentence, Fernando broke down. He can be heard begging to let go when he's seen fighting with the guards. He's resisting with all his might, trying not to be put in prison. In our 4th spot, we have Spencer Lewis. Spencer Lewis was involved in an armed robbery gone wrong. He attempted to rob 2 brothers of their weed, money, and video games, but Lewis ended up shooting and killing the 2 brothers. He said he got scared during the robbery and that's why he fired. On Spencer's hearing, he entered the court smirking, acting all cocky and confident, which later turned into tears.
The victim's family, I never went there with that intention of hurting them.
But after his little breakdown, he can be seen leaving the court, smirking once again to the camera. So was it all just an act? Maybe. Moving on to number 3, we have Keyshawn Mann. I think this teen has to be the youngest convict on the list. Keyshawn Mann was only 13 years old when he shot and killed his mother's boyfriend, Jermell Stokes. He claimed that the boyfriend was mistreating him. Back in 2012, Keyshawn grabbed his mother's handgun, snuck up behind Jermell, and shot him in the back of the head. But his defense argued that the shooting was accidental. After he received his sentence, the courtroom went crazy. Keyshawn's family members were yelling and screaming, saying that he's innocent. And then one man got tackled and then removed from the court. Coming in at number 2, we have the collapsing duo. In this video, you can see Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham both resisting being taken away after learning that they would spend the rest of their lives locked away. Now, Landon and I did react to this video in our courtroom freakout video, so go check that out. But now I did some research and found out what they were in for. So Erica and Shanita were convicted of killing a young girl back in 2009. Apparently they were looking after her, but instead were torturing her for 2 weeks straight. That just makes me sick to my stomach. Well, in this video you can see the two flop to the floor and refuse to get up after hearing their sentence. In fact, one of the girls had to be placed in a chair and rolled away. While this is all happening, one of the girls' mothers is just completely freaking out. It was just complete madness in that courtroom. And in our number 1 spot, we have Shondell Jackson. In 2009, 19-year-old Shondell Jackson was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and robbery of a university student, Nathan Potter. During the attempted robbery of Potter, Jackson and his partner fatally shot him to death. During most of his trial, Jackson kept his cool. He showed no remorse for his actions, and at one point he even turned and smiled at the victim's family. But after being sentenced to life in prison, his demeanor quickly changed. He became angry and started cursing at the judge. He stood up to leap at the judge, but officers were there to quickly take him down and then pepper spray him.
Coming in at number 10, we have Quinn Skaggs. Right off the bat, with a name like Quinn Skaggs, you know this guy means business. This guy sounds like he's a character from a Guy Ritchie movie. If you're in the crime world and you're dealing with Quinn Skaggs, he's probably going to cut your pinky off when you don't pay him back in time. Now, Quinn had a long rap sheet when he was brought in. He was only 17 and he had already been arrested for a burglary spree where he was breaking into people's homes while armed with a handgun. Man, at his age, the most dangerous thing I was doing was trying to convince my older brother to buy me a Mickey of rum so I could feel cool at a party. Skaggs also got into a fight at school, and when a teacher tried to break it up, he beat the hell out of the teacher, who needed to have surgery on his face. This 17-year-old was being held in a detention center and then kicked out the window and used bed sheets to scale down the side of the building like he was in the show Prison Break.
Timothy Masters comes into this list at number 9. On February 11th, 1987, the body of Peggy Hetrick was found in a field and she had been stabbed in the back and sexually mutilated. 15-year-old Timothy Masters lived in a trailer that was only 100 feet away from her body. The police questioned him and searched his room and found several thousand pages of violent journal entries and drawings in his closet and a collection of knives. Even though there's no physical evidence linked him to the crime, he was charged and convicted of the murder and he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Well, 12 years later, his sentence was later removed when DNA evidence proved his innocence. Timothy Masters was given $5.9 million in order to settle the wrongful conviction lawsuit. The wrongfully convicted Marvin Anderson comes into this list at number 8. Marvin Anderson was only 18 years old when he was convicted of robbery, sodomy, abduction, and rape. An all-white jury convicted him on all the counts and he was sentenced away to 210 years in prison. I mean, is this real life right now? However, in 1988, another man came forward and admitted that he was the one that actually committed the crime. He fully confessed under oath. He did this in an open court, but the judge who presided over the original trial refused to drop the charge on Marvin Anderson. Marvin spent a total of 15 years in prison, but it took another 4 years to become fully exonerated. And now at number 7, we have Dennis Brown. He was convicted of rape back in 1984 when he was only 17 years old, and this is after the victim picked him out of a lineup. You know when they stand there and you're like, he's the man, number 3? Dennis Brown claimed that the police had threatened him at knife point, forcing him to confess to the charges. charges. The jury found him guilty, and when he was charged with aggravated rape, burglary, and aggravated crimes against nature, which gave him a sentence of life imprisonment. Dennis Brown contacted the Innocence Project, and DNA tests concluded that he was not the rapist. So in 2004, after serving 19 years in prison for a crime he never committed, he was finally released. The Dixmoor 5 comes into this list at number 6. The Dixmoor 5 are 5 African American men who were falsely convicted of rape and murder of a 14-year-old Kateresa Matthews. At the time of the arrest, the 5 men were between the ages of 14 and 16 years old. During the intense and long interviews, 3 of them gave false confessions because they were coerced and physically abused and threatened during the interrogation. Each of them received at least 80 years in prison, but in 2011, DNA tests concluded that the semen on the victim belonged to another man. All of the charges were dropped after they spent 20 years in prison, and they finally became free men in 2011. They reached a wrongful conviction settlement of $40 million, which is actually the largest settlement in Illinois' history. Moving on to Thomas Haynesworth, and he makes it onto this list at number 5. He was arrested at the age of 18 years old after a woman identified him as the attacker. He was convicted of 4 violent rapes and sentenced to a total of 84 years in prison. Thomas Haynesworth maintained his innocence throughout his time spent in prison, and based on new DNA evidence, the real perpetrator was believed to have been his neighbor and closely resembles him. After the DNA testing, he was exonerated and was released from prison in March of 2011 after spending 27 years in prison behind bars. So for this wrongful conviction, he was given a lump sum of $1 million. I bet you the guy was taxed on it and only took home like just over half. He had 2 types of pensions, and he was also given a tuition at a community college. Christopher Abernathy takes the number 4 spot. On October 5th, 1984, the body of a 15-year-old girl was found behind a shopping mall. She had been raped and stabbed to death. More than a year after the crime, police brought in 18-year-old Christopher Abernathy for questioning. After 40 hours of interrogation, he had signed a confession which stated that he attempted to rape her and accidentally stabbed her with a pocket knife. Christopher was a high school dropout, and he had a learning disability as well. So the police used this and coerced him into making a false confession. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison because he was 17 years old at the time of the murder. The jury initially wanted him to get the death penalty. After the Innocence Project picked up his case, new DNA evidence exonerated him of all charges, and he was released after spending 28 years behind bars as an innocent person. The West Memphis 3 ironically make it into number 3 spot. This was a murder case that shocked the world. 3 little boys were found tied up. They were tied up with their own shoelaces, sexually mutilated, beaten, and left for dead. The local authorities arrested 18-year-old Damian Eccles, 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, and 17-year-old Jesse Miss Kelly because they were known around town for wearing black and listening to heavy metal. All 3 of these teenagers were convicted of the murders and were sentenced away to serve life in prison, except for Damian Eccles, who was sentenced to death. This is a highly controversial case because all of the evidence was circumstantial, so a lot of people believe that they are actually innocent. The Scottsboro Boys comes into this list at number 2. They are 9 African American teenagers who were accused of raping 2 white women on a train back in 1931. These were 9 unemployed young men who were illegally riding the train. They were held in Alabama on minor charges, and they convinced these 2 women into saying that these young boys had raped them. Within 2 weeks of this false accusation, the Scottsboro Boys were convicted, and 8 of them were sentenced to death. And the youngest boy, who was 13 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. One of the women who have claimed to be a rape victim came forth and admitted that she was coerced and manipulated into accusing these boys of raping her when they never even touched her. And finally, in a number 1 spot, we have George Stinney. On March 1944, 2 young girls had been found brutally murdered and beaten over the head and dumped into a ditch. George Stinney was a 14-year-old African American who was convinced of the murder as a result of racially biased and discriminatory jury. He was convinced in less than 10 minutes by an all-white jury, and he was sentenced to death. He was denied an appeal, and he was executed by the electric chair. A group of lawyers and activists investigated this case, and in 2014 he was exonerated of all the charges nearly 70 years later.
Starting off this countdown, we have TJ Lane. Back in February of 2012, 18-year-old TJ Lane entered a high school in Ohio and shot 3 students. He injured 3 others. There was no motive for his actions, and during his trial, he showed no remorse. In fact, during his sentencing, he was absolutely ruthless. He entered the court wearing a light blue button-up shirt, which he removed to reveal a white t-shirt with the word killer written on the front of it. If that's not bad enough, at one point he turned to the courtroom, said some obscene things, and then gave them a middle finger. You can see that he just doesn't care. It's scary how he shows like zero emotion, and he killed people.
Coming in at number 9, we have a big breakout. If you're gonna break out, you might as well bring some of your friends with you, right? Well, some teens in Nashville thought that this was the best idea. They had a plan to break out, and I think it worked better than they ever would have expected. Here's an opening from the news story that was covering the incident.
Good evening. Take a look at these photos. Tonight, the hunt continues for 7 teens who escaped from the Woodland Hills juvenile.
The news highlighted the 7 that were still on the loose, but 32 actually made a break at the same time. That's what you call teamwork. Basically what happened was all of these teens kicked out the windows to their rooms at the same time and then jumped out the windows and hightailed it into the woods. Now you might think it would have been confusion that caught all of these cops off guard, and that's why so many people were able to get away, but it was actually just incompetence on the side of the police. They didn't even notice that the teens had escaped until an hour after it had happened. Coming in at number 8, we have MICO West. If you break out of prison, the first thing you're going to want to do is lay low. Well, that's what they have you believe in the movies. That there's some secret hideout you can go to and there's a bunch of your friends there. Maybe there's an Xbox and there's always really good food. But in reality, when you get out of prison, you have nowhere to go. You don't even have clothes to change into, and you're obviously in an orange jumpsuit. So unless you have everything planned out, most criminals who escape will turn back to crime because it's the only way they can get money and something to eat. This is what happened to MICO West. He was able to break out by swiping a key card and then opening the front door and just walking right out. That sounds like something that was pulled right out of a video game, but it was true. Then he got busted when he tried to steal a candy bar. The dude was just trying to get something to eat. Coming at number 7, we have the Nashville teens. A juvenile detention center in Nashville was holding 4 possibly dangerous teens who managed to escape in December of 2019. How they escaped is still unknown, but it's thought that they snuck past the guards and then jumped a fence and then were on the run. Now, why were these teens being held? I mean, the 4 of them were between the ages of 15 and 17, so how deadly could they be? I keep thinking about what I was doing at that age, and I really was just trying to spend more time playing video games and less time doing homework. That's as crazy as I got. Well, it turns out that these 4 might have been up to something a little more intense. 2 of them were wanted for armed robbery, and the other 2 were wanted for murder. Well, I don't think there's any homework in jail, so I guess that's a little bit of a bonus. Coming in at number 6, we have JOYRIDE. A Louisiana detention center had 3 teens break out with an escape vehicle that was drawing a lot of attention, because there's a lot of ways in which you could slip out of a detention center. You could do the whole walk through the woods thing for hours and people chase you down with lights and dogs. That's a classic. There's also the Shawshank crawl through a mile of poop and then you come out on the other side and then you move to Mexico. Or my favorite, which is sit on each other's shoulders and wear a massive trench coat and a fake mustache, but that's a very advanced technique. But these teens wanted to escape in something that was a lot less inconspicuous. The 3 of them decided that they would jump into a cop car and drive into the city. Well, it didn't take long for the cops to pull them over and the 3 teens were thrown back in prison. It seems that these teens were going for the hiding in plain sight approach to sneaking away. Coming in at number 5, we have It Worked in the Movies. Let's move back over to Nashville, where one teen wanted to try another escape tactic. This goes to show that you can't trust anything you see in the movies, because when you try it in real life, it doesn't work out at all. Like when this teen tried to escape from a juvenile prison by walking through the ceiling. When you see something like that happening in the movies, it always seems like the sneakiest move of all time. When someone slides through the vents and it's all perfectly clean, and then when in reality it would be packed with bugs and it would be one of the loudest things of all time. Well, look at what happens when people try to recreate the movies in real life. As you can see from the clip, they could hear him walking around in the ceiling, and eventually he came smashing through the drywall. You know what? I'm gonna give this guy an A+ for trying and even getting into the ceiling in the first place. Even though his plan didn't come together, it's still very bold. Coming in at number 4, we have BRITTAIN MCAULIFFE. This one is actually terrifying. BRITTAIN McAULIFFE was arrested for attempted murder. He was only 16 years old, so they put him into a juvenile correctional facility. He was meant to serve all of his time there, but while staying at the facility, they thought it would be a good idea to include him in a program that would help troubled youth find work while they were serving time. So he was given a job as a construction worker, and it seemed like things were going well until one day he just vanished. He literally just walked off the job site. A very simple escape plan, but an effective one. This is where the story gets even crazier. BRITTAIN was on the run for over a month, and in this time he stole a gun and shot a woman 4 times. Thankfully, the woman lived. Coming in at number 3, we have Ty Harris, the getaway master. It doesn't matter how hard the police try to catch this kid, it seems they can't keep him behind bars. Ty Harris was originally in a standoff with police where they were chasing him down for robbery. He had this standoff, but then he slipped away. The police eventually caught him, and then he was locked up in a Nashville juvenile detention prison. While staying there, he realized the best way to not be in prison is to break out through one of the windows and escape on foot. This is when his skills at evading the police came into play again. Ty made it to a strip mall, and when the police showed up, he hid behind a truck and the cops didn't see him, and then they drove off while he was right under their noses. Ty then stole a truck from this strip mall parking lot where the cops were just looking for him and slipped away and was nowhere to be found. Holy moly, this kid is good at not getting caught. Coming in at number 2, we have party time. Sometimes you break out of prison not because you wanted to get free and run away from your punishment. No, you just wanted a little bit of a breather. You want to stretch your legs a little bit, maybe catch up with your friends and feel good for a little while before you have to go back. Well, apparently this happens more often than you would think. Juvenile detention centers all over America have had teens who break out after prisons are finished doing their rounds. They will sneak out and go party with their friends for a little while, usually have their friends meet them outside with some sort of substances that make them feel really good. Then before it's time to wake up in the morning, they will be back in their beds like nothing happened. Maybe prisons should be a little more fun and people wouldn't be trying to break out all the time. God, I'm so smart. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have TJ Lane, one of the most terrifying teens to ever escape prison. TJ Lane was given a triple life sentence for coming to his high school with a handgun and killing 3 students in cold blood. He did this all while wearing a shirt which he wrote the word killer on the front. On top of this, in a way to mock his victims, he wore another shirt that said killer to his sentencing. While held in a state prison, he saw an open window and made a break for it. Thankfully, he wasn't on the loose for very long before he was captured. This could have turned out to be so much worse, but he was quickly taken back to prison, where he will most likely be for the rest of his life.